Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Since yesterday, we have been hearing a lot about the desired flexibility in the power system to absorb greater share of renewable energy in future. But there is also a question which stares right at us at the moment. How much flexibility are we able to use it, which is already available in the system? It's in that context we propose to do this small exercise to begin with, to develop a model where we wanted to understand what is the really value of the pump hydro energy storage system, which are already existing in the country. I'm going to just skip this part. The main challenges which arise due to the variable renewable energy is because it's variable and uncertain. So there are two different things. So they're variable in nature also, and they're uncertain in nature also. But currently we're addressing only variability, not uncertainty here. Sunshine and wind are not available consistently throughout the day and throughout the year. And there is a lack of coincidence with the demand pattern. And this is very important. And of course, finally, it is also location specific. So how can we address that? Well, we can do it by better load forecasting. There have been a number of papers presented in this conference about this. Is it possible to shift the load? Yes, to some extent possible through appropriate tariff methodologies, through demand side management, or maybe we can also address it through energy storage. So, but as soon as we talk about energy storage, immediately we think of battery. Well, we already have a battery which is perhaps the cheapest battery that we want to understand is the pumped storage. Storing the water in the potential energy of in the dam is what really can bring in the significant value of storage at a much cheaper cost as compared to the battery. There is already a lot of literature existing in the context of modeling, in fact, the operational modeling of pump storage also. But we want to look at this thing from a unit commitment model perspective using just a small simple bus system. So pump hydro storage, many of you might already be aware, you have essentially two reservoirs. You have an upper reservoir and a lower reservoir. So you produce electricity when the water flows from the upper reservoir to the bottom reservoir. And then when you have excess power or you want to use other resources which are available for power generation and pump the water back to the upper reservoir. Essentially, that's how this battery operates. This is something not new. In India, we have essentially 63 sites which have been identified with a cumulative potential for about 96 gigawatt. And most of this potential, if you notice, is in the western region, where we are expecting a lot of renewable energy to be integrated. As of now, we have about 4,800 megawatt capacity on the ground. Another 1,100 megawatt is in the construction phase. I must point out one more aspect here that whenever we say it's under construction, sometimes there are two aspects to it. One is the main plant, and second is the whether the pumping action, the lower reservoir has been constructed or not. Some of the major pump storage plants in India are, the first one was Kalamparai in Tamil Nadu. It is being used in pumping operation, in pumping mode. Srisailam in Andhra Pradesh and Sardar Sarovar, it is not yet because I think some tail end, some work is still remaining. Purulia is being used, Ghatgar in Maharashtra is being used. Teri, the lower reservoir part, I think it is still under construction, is due to be completed in 2018. So these are the major capacities, and most of these capacities, if you notice, are actually in the southern and the western region. So what we wanted to essentially do is to set up a unit commitment model, and we wanted to find out what would be the value of presence of storage. So we want to run a system with and without pumping action of a pump hydro energy systems. We set up a mixed integer non-linear program in GAMS, and with the objective function of minimizing total cost subject to various constraints for power balance, for generation capability, ramp-up limits, minimum uptime, downtime, transmission flow limits, and most importantly also hydrological constraints on the PHES and discharge limits. So we also need to consider what is the reservoir capacity of the upper reservoir and the lower reservoir, and how much is the maximum flow which is possible from the upper reservoir to the bottom reservoir, and how much you can pump back from the bottom reservoir to the upper. So all these aspects were built into the system. The biggest challenge in setting this kind of a model was actually to deal with two integers which appear in a non-linear nature. It's because this particular plant can be operated, so it has three stages here. It can be operated in the power generation mode, it can be operated in a pumping mode, or it need not be operated at all. So which means actually you have two integers multiplying, and that's how brings it the non-linearity here. And that seems to be a bit challenged even for a very small system like this one. This is a small 6-bus system that we used, some stylized number. It doesn't represent any state, any jurisdiction. We have put two thermal power plants, one coal-fired, one gas-fired, one PV unit for 150 megawatt, one PHES, which is its output is 230 when it is producing and 200 megawatt when it can consume, and 7 transmission lines. We have now also implemented this on a 30-bus system, but I'm not presenting those results here, because by the time we submitted this paper, this was still the 6-bus system. I'm sure, I think you can make out something here. This is the demand profile that we use. These are two peaks. This is a stylized demand profile that we set up here, one morning peak and one evening peak. And there are two generators which are being used. If you can notice, this is the coal generator number 1 here. This is here. Gas power plant is not used as frequently except during the evening peak. We also feed the PV actual, what we call is PV act, essentially what has been forecasted, and we assume that it has been forecasted perfectly, but what is being scheduled depends on the system conditions. So there is some amount of PV which can be spilled, which means which will be curtailed, and that curtailment of PV is given here, if you can notice this. That's the reason, because it's not coinciding with the peak of the system as such. And there is some part of unmet energy also due to certain constraints, sometimes ramping constraints. Then we run the same model again, and this time now this model allows for the pumping. So if you notice, actually wherever you see this particular orange line going in the negative, essentially the pump is being operated, and pumping also being operated during the day, because now it wants to use more solar power which is available. So very little curtailment happens for solar, and that's a very small value which you can see here, this part here, and I can go back. You can see a lot of solar was being spilled, but much less amount of solar is being spilled, and of course in this model now the unmet energy is also 0. Then we wanted to see essentially, so what is the value, what do we get out of it? So we have two costs to be compared, one when the pump is functioning, one the pump is not functioning. Difference between the two should essentially give us the value of the pumping action itself. We try to work that out, and in this case you can see there is a reduction in the total system cost. And then we want to say, okay, how much is the total system cost resulting in terms of number which a manufacturer or a policymaker would like to see. Well, we arrived at this number. We said, okay, if this plant is supposed to have a life of say 30 years, that is some discount rate, 15% private discount rate which we are using here. Value of pump facility essentially comes to about 80 lakh rupees per megawatt. So how does it help us? So it helps us in the sense that if we have an existing hydropower plant, somebody mentioned, I think in the morning in one of the sessions, that even if we have some existing small or even medium-sized hydro facilities available, and it's possible to do hydrological studies, and it is possible for us to set up this kind of a model for a state or for a region, for a country, we should be able to make a decision, is it really cost effective for us to really construct this lower reservoir and built into this small battery into the power system. That's how it should help us. And you can also see that here that total reduction in the system cost comes to about 30 paisa. So essentially it means that if somebody is there who wants to offer you otherwise a charging facility, just like a battery charging facility, it means 30 paisa is what somebody should be willing to pay, because that's the value we derive out of the system. Well, then it comes to conclusions. I'll just like to mention specifically in the context of how it's being used currently. Interestingly, if you look at, say, even Sri Salem or other plants, you will generally notice that the operation code of these plants mention that they are supposed to be operated only during high frequencies. And generally those high frequencies, it has been noted through operational experience or whatever, they say during this happen always during the night. So essentially you will use a thermal power plant to do the pumping. So as of now, the operation code has not been changed. So we still tend to see that thermal capacity is being used during the night time to actually pump the water back rather than actually using the available wind energy or solar energy during the day. Of course, this model still has many things to do. It's just a small beginning. We haven't done it on a very small granularity of 15 minutes. It's on a 24-hour basis currently. We are not looking at really life cycle of different storage technologies. That's also possible to do it. We are not currently looking at the variations across the seasons, as some of the studies have attempted that. And of course, the greatest benefit that you can get is between the non-coincidence of the peak between the solar and wind itself, which can help you some of the benefits differently, which means you should be able to actually recharge the reservoir even during those seasons when you have high wind, and perhaps take it forward for at least a week or a couple of weeks, just a guess. That needs to be studied before we can commit on that. Well, thank you very much. I think I'm ready for many questions.
Well, I have a question. Suppose you have a run-of-the-rivers plant with 1 day's pondage. You don't need to have any pumped storage system, no? Isn't this, have you estimated the benefit of such a system? Just creating a day pondage.
Yes, in a sense, any hydro plant itself is a temporary battery. If I could have made a decision between the day itself, should I use it in the morning and the afternoon? That's what we intend to say. Means I can store the water in one reservoir. That's only one reservoir, and I say, okay, I don't spill it. I'm going to use it only in the evening time. But
the river system, there is virtually no reservoir.
Right. No,
but,
what I'm saying
excepting
is,
a small weir is there, huh?
You said 1 day pondage, right? That's what I'm saying. But there's nothing we can store it back. So we have not currently tried to look into another river plants.
No, my idea is if you have 1 day's pondage upstream, not another river, another pond downstream, you can operate the plant any which way you want. Okay. Right? So then you don't need
you need the lower reservoir is not required. That's what you want to say. Yeah. Okay. Yes. It's even cheaper. Yes.
Thank you.
No, there is one.
No, there is one.
Colin Sylvester, Uniper UK. In the UK, pump storage is used mainly for reserve. Have you looked at the value of it for that?
No. Not really. That was a very short answer, isn't it? I hope it satisfies you.